Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. Today we come to the Sunday of the Samaritan Woman, and we listen again to this beautiful story from the Gospel of St. John about the woman who met our Lord at the well in the Samaritan city of Sychar. Her story is very familiar to us, and each year when we hear it read in church, we tend to hear all of the things that we've heard in the past. But I want to try and imagine for a moment what it must have been like for some of the first hearers of this story, those first century Jews to whom this gospel was written for the purposes of introducing them to God incarnate in Jesus Christ. I think they would have expected this story to end in a wedding. Yes, a wedding. And for our Lord to propose marriage to the father of the woman at the well, and for the father to accept joyfully. Why do I think this? Well, I think this because whenever we read about a traveler sitting down near a well in the Old Testament, especially one who is fleeing from danger and who talks to a woman there, especially one who has some distant Jewish family connections, the traveler and the woman always seem to end up married. Moses fits this description. He was fleeing from the charge of murder in Egypt, and in the second chapter of Exodus ends up helping the female members of his future father-in-law's family. They were being harassed by some shepherds as they came to the well to water their flocks, and Moses came to their rescue. Later, he discovered the connection between himself and them and ends up marrying into the family. The same with Jacob, who was fleeing from his brother and met Rachel at the well. Remember, he was so smitten with her that he agreed to work for 14 years in order to get her father's permission to marry her. So Jacob's marriage to Rebekah was arranged at a well. The event we read about in today's gospel has many similarities to these famous Old Testament stories. One of the similarities starts chapter 4 of St. John's Gospel, before the passage for today, where we are told that our Lord was traveling through Samaria while fleeing from Jerusalem. The Pharisees had found out that he was baptizing more people than St. John the Baptist, and so their hatred of St. John was shifting over to our Lord Jesus. Jesus knew it wasn't his time yet, and so he left the city and started back toward his normal center of operations in Capernaum, which is in the northern part of the country. He was fleeing in a way like the two of the Old Testament characters I just mentioned. St. John's story is also similar in that our Lord found himself talking to a woman who was technically not a Jew, who was separated from the Jews, but because she was a Samaritan, both he and she knew that she had at least a little Jewish blood in her veins. It had been many years since the Jews and the Samaritans would not have any contact with one another before the Babylonian captivity, when they were one and the same people. This story is also similar to the Old Testament accounts in that help is exchanged. In the case of Jacob, he needed help, and Rebekah gave it to him. Jesus, too, asked the woman for help, and even though she was reluctant, the first century reader may have just seen this as one more example of the way that, maybe I should call it dance, that happens when a man and a woman first meet. But of course, the marriage doesn't end, the story doesn't end in a marriage, does it? Or does it? I think that St. John knew exactly the impact that his story would have on the first readers of his gospel, and he wanted to convey to them that though our Lord would not literally enter into marriage with the Samaritan woman, he would indeed become one with her soul, and that spiritually. The new life that Jesus Christ offers us gives us the opportunity to be one with God in a way that had never before been possible, like a marriage. In Christianity, our souls are married to God. He saves us to the utmost. As St. Paul says, "Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." That's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. This is the origin of the Orthodox theology of the bridegroom, the husband of you, the church. He doesn't stand waiting at the altar in a tuxedo, but he waits by the cross, upon which his blood was spilled for you, waiting for you, eager to have his perfect and life-giving soul wed to your sinful soul, your soul which wanders continually in the bleak of night of selfishness and ignorance, as mine does as well. As we hear again this year the story of the Samaritan woman, don't let the story pass you by. Don't let the bridegroom continue to wait for you while you waste your life. Rather, allow your soul to be wed to the Lord, and like the Samaritan woman and many of the first century readers of this book, see the change in your life that this wedding will bring. Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen.